Jasmine stared at the rebuilt community center, tears streaming down her face as hundreds of motorcycles thundered away. 24 hours earlier, she had been threatened with eviction for harboring those thugs in her apartment. Now everything had changed because she refused to close her door. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe in the power of kindness in the face of adversity, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes who changed their communities forever. Now let's rewind to see how a single mom's compassion sparked a revolution. Jasmine Carter checked her bank account balance for the 5th time that day, hoping the numbers might somehow increase if she stared at them long enough. $43.17 stared back at her barely enough to cover groceries for the next few days, let alone the overdue electric bill that threatened to leave her and 6-year-old Zora in darkness. The 34-year-old black single mother rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache forming behind her eyes. Birmingham, Alabama, had never been an easy place to raise a child alone, but the past few months had pushed her closer to the edge than ever before. Outside her apartment window, dark clouds gathered ominously, promising the winter storm meteorologists had been warning about all week. Alabama rarely saw severe winter weather, which made the approaching storm all the more concerning. The city simply wasn't equipped to handle significant snowfall or ice. Jasmine glanced at her watch and sighed. Her morning shift at Sunnyside Diner ended at 2, giving her just enough time to pick up Zora from school before starting her evening receptionist job at Caldwell Thompson & Burke, a predominantly white law firm downtown. The two jobs barely kept them afloat, but she had little choice with rent constantly increasing. She grabbed her coat, a thin garment that offered minimal protection against the biting cold, and headed for the door. The apartment complex Ridgewood Heights had seen better days. The paint peeled from the walls in the hallway, and several light fixtures remained perpetually broken. Jasmine had submitted maintenance requests countless times, but Mr. Whitfield, the landlord, seemed to have a selective memory when it came to repairs in the units occupied by black residents. Just last week, the washing machine in the laundry room had been fixed within hours of Mrs. Peterson, a white tenant, reporting it. Meanwhile, Jasmine had been waiting 3 months for her leaky bathroom faucet to be addressed. The contrast wasn't subtle. She trudged through the parking lot toward her ancient Toyota Corolla, a vehicle with nearly 200,000 miles that protested starting on cold mornings. Today, it refused to cooperate entirely. The engine made a sickly whining noise before falling silent. Jasmine tried again and again, but the car remained stubbornly lifeless. She slammed her palm against the steering wheel in frustration. The bus would take too long, and she couldn't afford to be late again. Her manager at the diner had made it clear that one more tardy arrival would result in termination. With no other options, she began walking the 1.5 miles to work, picking up her pace as the first snowflakes began to fall. By the time she reached Sunnyside Diner, her fingers were numb and her shoes soaked through. The day passed in a blur of coffee refills, plate balancing, and forced smiles in the face of customers who either ignored her completely or treated her with barely concealed contempt. One particular table of businessmen had run her ragged with demands, only to leave a $5 tip on a $90 check. At the end of her shift, Jasmine called the school, explaining she would be late picking up Zora due to car troubles. The administrative assistant sighed with undisguised annoyance, reminding her of the late pickup fee, another expense she couldn't afford. The snow was falling steadily now as she began her walk to the elementary school. She pulled her coat tighter, the thin material, doing little against the intensifying cold. The sidewalks were already becoming treacherous, and twice she nearly lost her footing on patches of ice. About halfway to the school, a police cruiser pulled alongside her, its lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, both white men, who approached with hands resting on their holsters. "Ma'am, we've received reports of suspicious loitering in this area," the taller officer stated, his eyes scanning her critically. Jasmine felt her heart race despite having done nothing wrong. "I'm just walking to my daughter's school. My car broke down," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "You got some ID on you?" the second officer asked, his tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. Jasmine fumbled with cold fingers to retrieve her wallet. I work at the diner back there, and I'm heading to pick up my daughter at Westfield Elementary, she added, handing over her driver's license. The officers examined it with exaggerated thoroughness while radioing in her information. Around them, several white pedestrians passed without a second glance from the police. After what seemed like an eternity, they returned her ID. "Make sure you're not hanging around anywhere you shouldn't be," the first officer warned as they departed, leaving Jasmine shaking with both cold and humiliation. By the time she reached the school, Zora was the last child waiting, sitting alone in the office with her small backpack clutched to her chest. The 6-year-old's normally bright eyes were dull with fatigue, and Jasmine noticed she seemed unusually flushed. "Baby, are you feeling okay?" she asked, pressing a hand to her daughter's forehead. Zora leaned into her mother's touch. "My throat hurts, Mommy," she whispered. Concern flooded Jasmine as she registered the unnatural warmth of her daughter's skin. After paying the late fee, which left her bank account at an even more precarious $28 and change, they began the long walk home through increasingly hazardous conditions. She carried Zora part of the way, her maternal instincts overriding the protests of her tired body. By the time they reached Ridgewood Heights, the snow had accumulated to several inches, and the temperature had dropped further. Jasmine fumbled with her keys, eager to get Zora inside and warm. When she opened the door, however, she was met with an apartment nearly as cold as the outdoors. Confused, she checked the thermostat, which showed the heat was off. She tried adjusting the settings, but nothing happened. A sick feeling settled in her stomach as she remembered Mr. Whitfield's warning about conservation measures during the storm. It seemed he had taken it upon himself to shut off the heat to certain units, and she had little doubt about which tenants were affected. Her suspicions were confirmed when she heard the heating system running in the hallway outside the apartments occupied by white residents. As if the situation couldn't worsen, an envelope had been slipped under her door while she was at work. Inside was an eviction notice, claiming multiple noise complaints and lease violations. The date on the notice was from the previous week, though she was certain it hadn't been there that morning. Mr. Whitfield was known for backdating paperwork to limit tenants' ability to contest his actions. Jasmine sat on the edge of her bed, Zora curled up beside her under every blanket they owned, her small body radiating concerning heat. The apartment's temperature continued to drop as night fell. Jasmine tried calling Mr. Whitfield repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. She considered taking Zora to the emergency room, but with no car and no money for an ambulance, their options were severely limited. The storm had intensified, making any journey on foot potentially deadly. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the poorly sealed windows of the apartment. Jasmine held her daughter close, whispering promises that everything would be all right, even as she wondered how they would survive the night. The weather forecaster's voice crackled through Jasmine's small radio, the only source of information with her cell phone battery dwindling. "This is developing into the worst winter storm to hit Alabama in 50 years, the announcer stated gravely. All roads are considered impassable, and emergency services are overwhelmed. Citizens are advised to shelter in place until further notice." Jasmine looked down at Zora, who had finally fallen into a fitful sleep, her breathing labored. The thermometer showed 101.3 degrees, and Jasmine had used their last dose of children's Tylenol an hour ago. The apartment had grown so cold she could see her breath forming misty clouds in the air. She had stuffed towels along the bottoms of doors and windows, but the bitter cold found its way through the poorly maintained structure regardless. The building had grown eerily quiet, as though the storm had swallowed all signs of life. Then suddenly, she heard it. The distant rumble of engines growing louder until they seemed to stop right outside the complex. Voices followed, raised against the howling wind. Curious, despite her exhaustion, Jasmine gently laid Zora down and moved to the window, wiping away condensation to peer outside. Through the swirling snow she could make out several figures, and the distinctive shapes of motorcycles now being covered in rapidly accumulating snow. The riders appeared to be arguing, gesturing toward the building, and then back at the impassable road. They were clearly stranded, caught in the open by the sudden intensity of the storm. Jasmine watched as they approached the building's main entrance, likely seeking shelter in the small lobby. Minutes later, she heard angry voices from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable voice of Mr. Whitfield. "We don't want your kind here. This is private property. Take your gang somewhere else before I call the police." The responding voices were too muffled for Jasmine to make out clearly, but the desperation in their tone was evident. She thought about Zora, about how she would feel if they were stranded in a storm with nowhere to go. Before she could reconsider, she grabbed her keys and stepped into the hallway, making her way down the stairs to the lobby. The scene that greeted her confirmed her suspicions. 18 black men and women in motorcycle gear stood in the small lobby, their faces etched with exhaustion and cold. Mr. Whitfield stood before them, his bathrobe pulled tight around his substantial frame, face flushed with anger. "I done told you people to get off my property," he was saying as Jasmine entered. "Ain't no room here for your trouble." The group looked nothing like the threatening gang Mr. Whitfield was making them out to be. They were clearly suffering from the cold, some visibly shivering their riding gear, inadequate against the unprecedented temperatures. One woman was massaging her hands, the fingers alarmingly pale, with early signs of frostbite. Mr. Whitfield Jasmine spoke up, drawing surprised looks from everyone in the lobby. "There's a state of emergency. These people need shelter." The landlord turned to her, his expression darkening further. "You stay out of this, Miss Carter. This ain't your business. These people were trying to break in." A tall man with close-cropped gray hair stepped forward from the group. "That's a lie. We knocked and asked politely for shelter until the road's clear. We've been turned away from 3 places already." He gestured to his companions. "We're the Defenders Motorcycle Club, returning from a charity ride for Children's Hospital when the storm hit. We're doctors, teachers, business owners, just trying to survive the night." Mr. Whitfield sneered. "Yeah, right. I know a gang when I see one. Now all of you get out before I call the cops." Jasmine thought of Zora upstairs, of the lessons she was trying to teach her daughter about compassion and doing what was right even when it was difficult. "They can come to my apartment," she heard herself say the words, surprising even her. "Until the storm passes." The bikers looked at her with hopeful expressions, while Mr. Whitfield's face contorted with rage. "You do that and you'll be violating your lease. Maximum occupancy fire codes. I'll have you evicted immediately." Jasmine thought of the eviction notice already waiting in her apartment. "Do what you have to do," she replied, then turned to the group. "I'm in apartment 412. It's not much, and the heat's been shut off, but it's better than freezing out there." The woman with the frostbitten hand stepped forward. "Thank you. We won't forget this." As the group filed toward the stairs, Mr. Whitfield pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police right now. You'll all regret this." Jasmine led the group upstairs, suddenly self-conscious about the state of her small apartment. When she opened the door, she found Zora awake and frightened, her eyes wide at the sight of so many strangers. "It's okay, baby," Jasmine reassured her. "These people needed help, just like we do sometimes." The gray-haired man introduced himself as Marcus Williams, president of the Defenders. "We can't thank you enough, Miss Carter, Jasmine Carter. And this is my daughter, Zora." One of the women stepped forward, her expression concerned as she looked at Zora. "I'm Tiana Jackson. I'm a nurse at Birmingham General. Your daughter looks like she has a pretty high fever." Relief washed over Jasmine. "Yes, and we're out of medicine. I would have taken her to the hospital, but with the storm." Tiana immediately moved to Zora's side, checking her temperature and examination her throat with a small flashlight from her pocket. "Looks like strep throat. I have antibiotics in my med kit on my bike. Someone needs to help me get it." 2 of the men immediately volunteered, following Tiana back outside to retrieve critical supplies. The apartment quickly filled with activity as the bikers organized themselves, pooling resources and expertise. They moved furniture to create space, shared what food they had in their saddlebags, and used their combined body heat to raise the temperature in the apartment. One man, who introduced himself as Darnell, an electrical engineer, examined the heating system. "It's been shut off externally," he confirmed. "We can't restart it without access to the building's maintenance room." Before they could discuss alternatives, a pounding on the door silenced the room. Marcus opened it to reveal 2 police officers, with Mr. Whitfield grinning triumphantly behind them. "That's them officers. Breaking and entering, trespassing, disturbing the peace. The taller officer surveyed the room with undisguised suspicion. "We've received complaints about gang activity at this address." Marcus stepped forward, his demeanor calm but firm. "Officer, we're the Defenders Motorcycle Club, stranded by the storm after a charity event. Miss Carter kindly offered shelter during a weather emergency. I'm a practicing attorney, and I can assure you we've broken no laws by accepting emergency shelter." The second officer focused on Jasmine. "Ma'am, are these people here with your permission?" "Yes, officer," she replied firmly. "My daughter is sick and one of them is a nurse helping her. They're guests in my home during this emergency." Mr. Whitfield pushed forward. "She's violating occupancy limits. Fire codes, I want them removed." The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. The storm had worsened dramatically, and forcing anyone back outside could be a death sentence. "Mr. Whitfield," the first officer finally said, "during a state emergency, normal occupancy restrictions can be temporarily waived for safety reasons." The landlord's face reddened. "So you're taking their side. You know what these people are like. They'll destroy the place." His words hung in the air, the racial implication unmistakable. The officers shifted uncomfortably. "We'll file a report," the second officer said neutrally. "But with the current weather conditions, there's nothing more we can do tonight." As they turned to leave, the first officer added quietly, "Just keep things quiet and civil." After they departed, Mr. Whitfield remained in the doorway, his expression venomous. "This isn't over. Come morning, you'll all be sorry." As Marcus closed the door, Jasmine sank onto the couch, the full weight of what she had done hitting her. She had risked everything to help strangers, potentially accelerating her own eviction and adding to her already overwhelming problems. Tiana returned with her medical kit, immediately administering medication to Zora. "Your daughter should start feeling better soon," she promised, arranging cold compresses for the girl's forehead. "Thank you for taking us in. Many wouldn't have." Jasmine nodded, watching as the bikers continued organizing the space, their quiet efficiency transforming her apartment into an emergency shelter. Outside, through the frost-covered windows, the storm raged on burying Birmingham under a blanket of white. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before being swallowed by the howling wind. The night was just beginning. The wind shrieked around the building like a wounded animal, finding every crack and crevice in the aging structure. Inside apartment 412, 18 bikers and 2 residents huddled together, pooling body heat and resources in their improvised shelter. Jasmine watched in amazement as the group operated with quiet efficiency, transforming her small living space into an organized emergency camp. "We always travel prepared," Marcus explained as members of the Defenders unpacked saddlebags containing emergency supplies. "Part of our club code. Never ride without being ready to help yourself or others." Tiana continued monitoring Zora, whose breathing had eased slightly following the administration of antibiotics. The little girl watched the activities around her with wide eyes, fear gradually giving way to curiosity. A tall, broad-shouldered man named Lawrence had taken charge of food resources, inventorying their collective supplies and planning how to stretch them. "We've got protein bars, beef jerky, trail mix, and some canned goods," he announced. "If we're conservative, we can make it last at least 36 hours. Jasmine contributed her own meager pantry contents, embarrassed by how little she had to offer. "I usually shop on Fridays," she explained apologetically. Lawrence shook his head. "You've given us shelter. That's worth more than any food." As the night deepened, the apartment grew colder. Darnell, and another biker named Rodney, examined the windows using duct tape and plastic bags to seal drafts. "Better than nothing," Darnell muttered, "but without heat. We're fighting a losing battle." The power flickered ominously, several times before finally surrendering to the storm, plunging the apartment into darkness. A collective groan rose from the group, quickly followed by the activation of flashlights and battery-powered lanterns. "That complicates things," Marcus observed grimly. Andre, a mechanical engineer, and the club's head mechanic spoke up. "I've got an idea. Our bikes have batteries. With the right connections, we might be able to power a small space heater, at least enough to keep the sickest areas warm." A flurry of activity followed, as several men volunteered to brave the storm to retrieve batteries from their motorcycles. Jasmine watched from the window as they struggled through snowdrifts that had already accumulated to their knees. Through other windows in the building, she could see neighbors watching, some taking photos or videos with their phones. The hostility was palpable even through walls and glass. When the men returned with the batteries, Andre and Darnell quickly went to work, rigging an ingenious system that connected to Jasmine's small space heater. The device sputtered to life, providing a modest circle of warmth that they positioned near Zora. "It won't heat the whole place," Andre cautioned, "but it should keep your daughter from getting worse." As they settled in for the long night, conversation naturally emerged. Jasmine learned that the defenders were far from the gang stereotype Mr. Whitfield and others had labeled them. Marcus, their president, held a law degree from Howard University and ran a practice specializing in civil rights cases. Tiana was a pediatric nurse practitioner. Lawrence owned a successful construction company. Andre taught mechanical engineering at a community college. The others included teachers, IT specialists, social workers, and business owners. "We founded the Defenders 10 years ago," Marcus explained. "Not just for the love of writing, but to change perceptions and give back to our communities. Today we were returning from delivering toys and donations to the Children's Hospital Cancer Ward." Jasmine shook her head, thinking of the immediate assumptions made about them. "I'm sorry for how you've been treated. We're used to it," Tiana said quietly. "But it never stops hurting." A tentative knock at the door silenced the room. Marcus moved cautiously to answer it, revealing a white woman in her 40s clutching a stack of blankets. "I'm Sarah Johnson from upstairs," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I saw what happened earlier. I thought you might need these." She thrust the blankets forward. "Thank you," Marcus said, genuine surprise in his voice. Mrs. Johnson nodded quickly. "My husband Robert would have come too, but he's keeping watch. Some of the other residents are. Well, they're not being neighborly. We've been leaving food and supplies by the doors of the black families in the building since the storm started. Mr. Whitfield always cuts their heat first during emergencies." She made air quotes around the word. "It's not right." Before anyone could respond, she added, "I should go before someone sees me," and hurried back down the hallway. The unexpected act of kindness boosted morale as the group settled in for the night. Jasmine found herself sitting with Marcus, Tiana, and several others as they shared stories of their lives and the discrimination they'd faced. "The law firm where I work," Jasmine confided, "I'm the only black employee. I hear the way they talk when they think I'm not listening. I've been passed over for promotion 3 times, always with different excuses." Marcus nodded. "After I graduated summa cum laude and passed the bar on my first try, I interviewed with 15 firms. Not a single offer, despite being in the top 5% of my class. Meanwhile, white classmates with lower grades had multiple offers. One by one, they shared similar stories, Tiana being mistaken for janitorial staff despite wearing scrubs and a name badge, Lawrence losing contracts when clients discovered he was black, Andre being repeatedly asked to show ID on the campus where he'd taught for 8 years. Around 2 in the morning, Jasmine's phone chimed with a text message. The sender was, "Mr. Whitfield, I've documented your lease violations. Expect formal eviction proceedings immediately. You've made a big mistake harboring those criminals." A second text followed from her boss at the law firm. "We've received concerning reports about illegal activity at your residence. Please explain yourself before reporting to work tomorrow." Jasmine showed the messages to Marcus, her hands trembling. "They're going to take everything from me for helping you." Marcus's expression hardened. "Not if I can help it. First thing in the morning, I'm activating our network. The Defenders have chapters in 30 states, and we have alliances with dozens of other clubs. What's happening here is textbook discrimination, and we have the resources to fight it." As the night wore on, Jasmine checked on Zora, regularly relieved to find her fever slowly subsiding under Tiana's care. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, but within the crowded apartment, a different kind of warmth had begun to grow. For the first time in months, Jasmine didn't feel alone in her struggles. Have you ever faced discrimination but found unexpected allies in your darkest hour? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe communities should stand together against injustice. Hit that like button and subscribe if you agree that kindness should be met with kindness, not punishment. What do you think will happen when morning comes and Mr. Whitfield makes good on his threats? Will the authorities side with him or recognize the emergency situation? Let's continue to find out how this community responds to the crisis. First light brought little relief from the storm, though the howling winds had diminished somewhat overnight. Jasmine awoke from a fitful sleep on the floor, having given her bed to Zora and Tiana. The apartment was cold but livable thanks to the motorcycle battery system which Andre and Darnell had monitored in shifts throughout the night. Most of the bikers were already awake, speaking in hushed tones to avoid disturbing those still sleeping. Marcus sat by the window, his phone in hand. "The network's coming back intermittently," he reported. "I've managed to get messages out to other chapters. They're mobilizing, but the roads are still largely impassable." Lawrence had organized breakfast from their supplies, carefully portioning out food to ensure it lasted. Jasmine checked on Zora, relieved to find her daughter's fever had broken during the night. "The antibiotics are working," Tiana confirmed. "She should start feeling much better today, but she'll need to complete the full course." The relative calm was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by aggressive pounding on the door. Marcus nodded to several of the larger bikers who positioned themselves strategically before he opened the door. Mr. Whitfield stood there, his face flushed with anger, flanked by two men in private security uniforms. Behind them stood several other residents, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Time's up," the landlord announced loudly. "I want all these people out of my building immediately." He thrust a stack of papers toward Jasmine. "This is an official notice of eviction for multiple lease violations. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm sure you're aware that evictions cannot be executed without a court order which requires a hearing. Additionally, we're still under a state of emergency during which evictions are typically stayed." The landlord's face darkened further. "Don't you try your legal mumbo-jumbo on me, boy. I know my rights as a property owner." The racial slur hung in the air like a physical presence. One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Furthermore, Marcus continued calmly, selectively enforcing rules against tenants based on race is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Shutting off heat to only certain apartments during a life-threatening emergency could constitute criminal negligence. Mr. Whitfield turned to the security guards. "Remove them, all of them, now." The larger guard hesitated. "Sir, we're only licensed for property patrol and deterrence. We can't physically remove legal tenants or their guests, especially during a declared emergency." Useless Whitfield spat. "What am I paying you for?" He pointed at the bikers. "These people are trespassing. They're my guests," Jasmine stated firmly. "And they have nowhere safe to go in these conditions." An unexpected voice joined the confrontation. "She's right, Richard." Sarah Johnson pushed through the gathered crowd, her husband Robert at her side. "These people have been nothing but respectful. We've been watching. They helped the little girl who was sick when you refused to do anything." Mr. Whitfield rounded on her. "Stay out of this, Sarah. It doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when you turn off heat to specific apartments during a blizzard," Robert Johnson replied. "We've documented the pattern, Richard. Only the black families had their heat disconnected. We checked with every resident on our floor." Murmurs arose from the gathered neighbors, some of whom appeared surprised by this information. Tiana stepped forward. "Mr. Whitfield, Zora needs medical attention at a hospital. Her condition has improved, but she requires proper care. If you'll allow us to arrange transportation once the roads are passable, I don't care what that child needs," Whitfield snapped. "You people bring nothing but trouble, always wanting special treatment." Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Checking it quickly, he announced, "I've just received word that some roads are becoming marginally passable for emergency vehicles. The state has deployed specialized trucks and snowplows." He turned to Mr. Prester to place. "Whitfield, we're willing to leave peacefully once safe transportation can be arranged for everyone, especially the child." The landlord sneered. "You can walk out the same way you came in. Not my problem where you go." One of the bikers, a stocky man named Jerome, who had been silently filming the interaction, spoke up. "For the record, sir, you're refusing to allow a sick child to receive medical attention and attempting to force people out during a state emergency when travel is still considered life-threatening by authorities, Mr." Whitfield seemed to suddenly notice the multiple phones recording the confrontation. "I'm enforcing the rules of my property," he blustered, but with less conviction. "These people are violating occupancy limits, which are suspended during declared emergencies," Marcus reminded him. Additionally, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the terms, conditions, or privileges of rental, which includes selective enforcement of rules based on race. The security guards exchanged glances, clearly wanting no part in what was unfolding. "Sir," the taller one finally said, "we can't assist with this. It could create liability issues for our company." "Fine," Whitfield snarled. "I'll call the real police. They know how to handle situations like this." As he stormed away, followed reluctantly by the security guards, the gathered neighbors slowly dispersed, many whispering among themselves. Sarah Johnson approached Jasmine. "We're organizing the other tenants." Many didn't realize what was happening with the heat. Richard has been claiming mechanical failures affected random units. Inside the apartment, Marcus was already on his phone again, his voice urgent. "We need legal intervention immediately." "Yes, documented discrimination, attempted illegal eviction during a state emergency endangerment of a minor. Yes, I've got multiple witnesses and video evidence." Jasmine's phone chimed with another message. This one from the law firm's HR department. "Your employment has been terminated effective immediately for unprofessional conduct and association with criminal elements. Final pay will be mailed." She showed the message to Marcus, who added it to his notes. "Retaliation. They've got no grounds for termination based on who you associate with outside of work. We'll add it to the case." Through the window, Jasmine could see more neighbors gathering in the parking lot despite the snow, some clearly arguing with each other. The community was fracturing along racial lines, with a few white residents joining the black families in protest against the landlord's actions. "It's always been like this," Jasmine said quietly. "He treats us differently, charges us more, ignores our maintenance requests. I just never had proof before." "Now we do," Marcus replied, showing her the videos being uploaded and shared across social media platforms. "And help is coming." As if on cue, the distant sound of engines could be heard approaching through the snow-covered streets. But these weren't police cruisers or emergency vehicles. The distinctive rumble of motorcycles cut through the morning air, growing louder by the second. The defenders' reinforcements had begun to arrive. The first group of riders appeared like apparitions through the swirling snow, their motorcycles modified with chains and specialized tires to navigate the treacherous conditions. There were about 20 of them, their leather jackets bearing patches similar to those worn by Marcus and his companions. They parked in a neat formation in the complex's lot, engines rumbling before falling silent. The new arrivals dismounted quickly, unloading packs of supplies from their saddlebags and storage compartments. Marcus greeted their leader, a woman with silver streaks in her dark hair. "Michelle, you made it." "How are the roads?" "Barely passable," she replied. "But the word is spreading. Chapters from 3 states are mobilizing. The social media campaign is blowing up. People are outraged by the videos." Jasmine watched from the window as Mr. Prope Whitfield emerged from his ground-floor apartment, his face contorting with rage at the sight of more bikers. He stormed toward the new arrivals, phone in hand, presumably calling the police again. Meanwhile, Marcus organized the defenders into action teams. "First priority is medical care for Zora and anyone else in need," he directed. Michelle's group brought emergency medical supplies. "Second, we need to document all housing violations and evidence of discrimination. Third, we need to establish a secure perimeter and communication system." The bikers moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the parking lot into an organized base of operations despite the continuing snow. What struck Jasmine most was the diversity of the newcomers. While the original group had been predominantly black, this new wave included white, Latino, and Asian riders, all working together seamlessly. Michelle approached Jasmine, introducing herself as president of the Montgomery chapter. "We've brought food, medical supplies, and portable heaters," she explained, "and our brotherhood extends far beyond what you see here." By this afternoon, riders from across the southeast will have arrived, road conditions permitting. True to her word, more groups began arriving over the next few hours, somehow finding ways through the nearly impassable roads. Some came by snowmobile or four-wheel drive vehicles when motorcycles couldn't make it. By noon, over 100 bikers had gathered, setting up an impromptu relief center in the parking lot. They distributed supplies not only to the original group, but to all residents of the complex who needed assistance. Jasmine learned that Marcus's emergency calls had activated a nationwide network. "The Defenders have chapters in 30 states," he explained, "and we maintain alliances with dozens of other clubs. When one of us is in trouble, we all respond." The response wasn't limited to physical presence. Jasmine's phone had been blowing up with notifications as the videos of Mr. Whitfield's discrimination went viral. Local news stations had picked up the story, and several reporters had braved the conditions to arrive on scene. A hashtag was trending numbered "Justice for Jasmine." More surprising was the response from the larger Birmingham community. As word spread about the situation, local residents with four-wheel drive vehicles began arriving with donations. Churches opened their doors as additional shelter space. A doctor who lived nearby trudged through the snow to examine Zora properly, confirming Tiana's diagnosis and providing additional medication. While this outpouring of support was heartening, not everyone was pleased. Mr. Whitfield had gathered a group of like-minded residents and property owners who watched the activities with open hostility. When police finally arrived, they seemed unsure how to proceed, caught between enforcing potential property violations and recognizing the humanitarian nature of the gathering during an emergency. The situation grew more complex when a city inspector arrived, introduced as a friend of one of the bikers. He requested access to examine the building systems, particularly the selective heat shutoffs. Mr. Whitfield initially refused, but relented when the inspector presented official documentation authorizing emergency inspections during the declared state emergency. "This is harassment," Whitfield shouted as the inspector began examining the maintenance room. "They're all conspiring against me." The inspector emerged an hour later with damning evidence. "I've documented manual shutoffs to specific units," he announced. "The system is fully functional, but valves have been deliberately closed to certain apartments, all of which I note are rented to black tenants." He continued methodically documenting code violations throughout the building. Faulty wiring mold, improperly maintained fire systems, all concentrated in the units occupied by minority residents. Meanwhile, Marcus had been gathering testimonies from current and former tenants. A pattern emerged of rent increases disproportionately affecting black residents, maintenance requests ignored based on race, security deposits withheld without cause, and selective enforcement of rules. The most disturbing discovery came when several residents compared their lease agreements and rent payment records. Black tenants were systematically charged 30 to 40% more than their white neighbors for equivalent units. "This is textbook housing discrimination," Marcus explained to the growing media presence. "We're building a class action case that will ensure Mr. Whitfield is held accountable." By mid-afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. What had begun as a desperate shelter for stranded bikers had evolved into a full-scale community relief effort and civil rights action. Portable generators hummed, providing power to essential medical equipment and communication devices. Outdoor cooking stations served hot food to residents and volunteers alike. A medical station had been established in a cleared section of the parking lot, treating minor injuries and illnesses. Perhaps most significantly, the racial divisions within the building had begun to crumble as white residents like the Johnsons worked alongside their black neighbors, many expressing shock and shame at the discrimination they had failed to notice or address. Jasmine found herself at the center of it all, reluctantly emerging as the face of the movement. News crews requested interviews, which Marcus helped her navigate, ensuring she conveyed the key points of the discrimination while protecting her legal interests. "You don't have to do this," he told her privately. "We can handle the media." Jasmine thought of Zora now resting comfortably under Tiana's care, and of the years she had endured Mr. Whitfield's discrimination in silence. "Yes, I do," she replied. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been afraid to speak up." As evening approached, bringing with it plunging temperatures, a new development electrified the gathering. Marcus received word that attorneys from the Southern Poverty Law Center and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund were en route, having recognized the case as potentially precedent-setting. Simultaneously, Jasmine received an email from a partner at a prestigious Black-owned law firm in Atlanta offering to represent her pro bono in both the housing discrimination case and a wrongful termination suit against her former employer. "They can't ignore us anymore," Marcus told her, a note of triumph in his voice. What began with a simple act of kindness has exposed decades of systematic discrimination. Jasmine looked out at the growing gathering, at the diverse faces, united in purpose, at the community being born from adversity. "I just opened my door," she said softly. "I never imagined it would open so many others." The dawn of the second day broke clear and cold, the storm having finally exhausted itself overnight. Sunlight glinted blindingly off the snow-covered landscape, revealing the full scale of what had transpired at Ridgewood Heights. Where 24 hours earlier there had been only a desperate group of stranded bikers, now stood a small village of activity. Over 200 motorcycles lined the parking lot and adjacent street, their owners having arrived throughout the night as roads gradually became passable. Pop-up tents and canopies created makeshift shelters where volunteers distributed supplies, prepared food, and coordinated relief efforts. The transformation extended beyond the physical. Residents who had previously avoided eye contact in the hallways now worked side by side, clearing snow, sharing resources, and exchanging stories. The artificial barriers that had separated the community were crumbling under the weight of shared purpose. Jasmine stood at the center of it all, barely recognizing the environment that had been her home for 3 years. Zora's health had improved dramatically, thanks to proper medication and care, her fever gone, and her energy returning. The little girl had become something of a mascot to the bikers, who took turns entertaining her with stories and small gifts fashioned from whatever materials were at hand. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked, joining Jasmine as she surveyed the activity. "Overwhelmed," she admitted. "Yesterday, I was just trying to survive. Today, I'm apparently leading a movement." Marcus smiled. "Sometimes leadership finds you rather than the other way around. But you're not alone in this." Indeed, a coalition had formed around Jasmine overnight. Legal representatives from civil rights organizations had arrived, setting up an impromptu office in one of the larger apartments offered by supportive residents. They were systematically documenting violations and preparing multiple cases: a class-action housing discrimination suit, individual civil rights claims, and regulatory complaints to state and federal authorities. Meanwhile, volunteers with construction experience had begun addressing the most critical repairs in the building, fixing broken windows, repairing leaking pipes, and restoring heat to all units. They worked without permission from Mr. Whitfield, citing emergency provisions that allowed for necessary interventions to protect life and safety. The landlord himself had retreated to his apartment, emerging only to shout ineffectual threats before being driven back by the steady gaze of hundreds of bikers and residents united against his discrimination. The media presence had grown exponentially. Local stations had been joined by national news crews, attracted by the compelling narrative of community response to discrimination. Jasmine had given several interviews, growing more confident with each retelling of her experience. "I never intended to become an activist," she told one reporter. "I just couldn't stand by and watch people suffer when I had the power to help, even in a small way." The story had resonated far beyond Birmingham. Social media was ablaze, with the hashtag number #JusticeForJasmine, which had evolved to encompass broader housing discrimination issues nationwide. Donations poured in through hastily established fundraising pages, providing resources for both immediate needs and longer-term legal battles. Perhaps the most unexpected development came when city officials arrived mid-morning. Rather than attempting to disperse the gathering, as many had feared, they came to assess the situation and offer support. The mayor herself made an appearance, clearly recognizing both the humanitarian aspects and the political implications of what was unfolding. "The city of Birmingham stands with those in need," she announced to the assembled cameras. We are investigating the allegations of discrimination and will ensure that justice is served." While these official pronouncements were welcome, Jasmine and the others recognized the political calculation behind them. It was the grassroots response that truly moved her. A local church had opened its doors as additional shelter space. Restaurant owners brought hot food. Medical professionals volunteered their services. Ordinary citizens arrived with shovels to clear paths and donations to support the cause. By midday, the gathering had taken on the atmosphere of a community festival rather than an emergency response, with music playing from portable speakers and children building snowmen in the cleared areas of the courtyard. Zora, feeling much better, joined them, her laughter, a poignant reminder of what the struggle was ultimately about. "We're creating the community we want to see," Tiana observed, watching the interactions. "One where people are judged by their actions, not their appearance." The movement was not without opposition. A small counter-protest had formed at the edge of the property, mostly white residents and business owners, concerned about property values and changing neighborhood character, thinly veiled references to racial demographics. They were vastly outnumbered, however, and the presence of numerous cameras discouraged any escalation beyond verbal complaints. The most significant development came in the early afternoon when a group of attorneys emerged from their makeshift office with documents in hand. They gathered Jasmine Marcus and representatives from various organizations for an urgent conference. "We've uncovered something much bigger than individual discrimination," the lead attorney explained, spreading papers across an improvised table. "Ridgewood Heights is part of a portfolio of properties owned by Whitfield Investment Group, all operating with similar discriminatory practices. We've found evidence of systematic rent gouging, selective enforcement, and maintenance manipulation, targeting minority tenants across 12 properties in 3 states. The revelation transformed their understanding of the situation. What had begun as a response to individual discrimination now had the potential to address systematic housing injustice across multiple communities. "This could be landmark litigation," Marcus noted, reviewing the documents, "class action affecting thousands of tenants." As the legal team continued their work, another transformation was occurring at the personal level. Jasmine received message after message from former coworkers at the law firm, many expressing support and sharing their own experiences of discrimination within the organization. 2 paralegals had risked their positions by providing internal communications documenting a pattern of bias in hiring, promotion, and termination decisions. "They've been doing this for years," one message read. "They're panicking now because you've got powerful allies and media attention." By late afternoon, the gathering had swelled to over 500 people, including bikers, residents, volunteers, and supporters from across the region. What had begun as a desperate night of survival had evolved into something none of them could have imagined: a spontaneous movement for housing, justice, a demonstration of community power, and a rebuke to those who would use property ownership as a tool of oppression. As sunset approached, Jasmine stood on an improvised platform to address the assembled crowd. Looking out at the sea of faces, diverse in age, race, and background, but united in purpose, she felt a surge of emotion. "2 days ago, I was just trying to keep my daughter warm," she began. "I opened my door to strangers because it was the right thing to do. Now we're opening doors everywhere, exposing decades of discrimination and building a community based on mutual respect and support." She gestured to the building behind her. "This isn't just about one apartment complex or one landlord. It's about the fundamental right to be treated with dignity regardless of the color of your skin. It's about standing together when the powerful try to divide us." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, the sound echoing across the snow-covered landscape. In that moment, Jasmine understood that regardless of the legal outcomes or media attention, something profound had already been accomplished. A community had found its voice. Have you ever witnessed a community coming together to fight injustice? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe that everyday acts of kindness can spark movements that change society. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. The bikers and residents had united against discrimination, but powerful interests were mobilizing against them. Would their newfound solidarity withstand the coming backlash? Could Jasmine and her allies transform a moment into a movement? Let's find out what happens when those who profit from division attempt to break the bonds of troublous community. The third morning brought a new reality to Ridgewood Heights. What had begun as a spontaneous response to discrimination had evolved into an organized movement with leadership structures, media strategies, and legal teams. But with increased visibility came increased opposition. Jasmine awoke to the sound of angry voices from the street below. Looking out her window, she saw a disturbing sight. Approximately 50 protesters had gathered at the entrance to the apartment complex, carrying signs with slogans like "Protect our neighborhoods, no biker gangs," and "Support property rights." Their chants carried clearly through the morning air. "Whitfield's right, defend what's white." The crude wordplay left little doubt about their true motivations. Marcus joined her at the window, his expression grim. "We expected this." Success always triggers resistance from those who benefit from the status quo. The counter-protesters were being kept at the property line by a mixture of bikers and local police who seemed to be maintaining neutrality for the moment. More concerning was the shift in media coverage. Jasmine's phone buzzed with notifications of news segments questioning the takeover of private property and featuring interviews with concerned citizens who characterized the bikers as dangerous outsiders and Jasmine as an private property opportunist. Social media had become a battleground with coordinated attacks attempting to reframe the narrative. Anonymous accounts posted fabricated stories about property damage, drug use, and violence at the gathering, while others dug into the backgrounds of key figures including Jasmine, seeking anything that could be used to discredit them. "They're trying to divide us," Tiana observed, scrolling through her phone. "Look at these comments trying to pit the black residents against the white allies or the bikers against the legal teams." The pressure extended beyond public opinion. Several local business owners who had provided supplies reported receiving threatening calls demanding they withdraw support. The church that had opened its doors as additional shelter space found its tax-exempt status being questioned by suddenly interested authorities. Most alarming were the calls Jasmine began receiving from parents of Zora's classmates, informing her that their children had been instructed not to play with her daughter when school resumed. "She's been labeled the child of a troublemaker," one sympathetic mother explained. "Some parents are saying you're teaching her to disrespect authority and property rights." The hurt in Zora's eyes when Jasmine gently explained that some friends might act differently toward her was almost unbearable. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" the little girl asked. "No," baby Jasmine assured her, fighting back tears. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults make bad decisions based on fear." The legal front brought new challenges as well. The attorneys working on the discrimination cases reported that Whitfield Investment Group had retained a powerful law firm specializing in defending corporations against class action suits. They had already filed motions to dismiss, arguing that individual lease agreements prohibited class representation and required arbitration rather than court proceedings. "It's a standard delay tactic," explained Kendra Washington, the lead attorney from the Southern Poverty Law Center. "They want to exhaust our resources and momentum while they prepare a more comprehensive defense." What truly concerned Jasmine, however, was the increasing isolation she felt from some of her neighbors. Residents who had stood with her just days earlier now avoided eye contact in the hallways, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation and their role in it. Some had received visits from representatives of the property management company who implied that supporting the protest might impact their own housing security. By midday, the atmosphere had grown tense. Police presence had increased, with officers now positioning themselves between the buildings and the makeshift camp in the parking lot. Their demeanor had shifted from neutral to suspicious, with frequent requests to check identification of bikers and volunteers. Marcus called an emergency meeting of the coalition leadership in one of the larger tents. Representatives from the biker chapters, legal teams, community organizations, and resident groups gathered to assess the changing dynamics. "They're implementing a classic pressure campaign," Marcus explained, laying out what they were facing. Divide the coalition, discredit the leaders, delay legal proceedings, and intimidate supporters. It's straight from the civil rights opposition playbook. Kendra nodded in agreement. We're also seeing coordination between city officials, business interests, and media outlets to reframe this as an issue of law and order rather than discrimination. The narrative is shifting from community responds to injustice to outside agitators disrupt neighborhood. The discussion turned to strategy with differing opinions on how to proceed. Some advocated for escalation, suggesting expanded protests at other Whitfield properties or city offices. Others recommended de-escalation, focusing on the legal process while reducing the visible presence that was drawing opposition. The debate grew heated at times, revealing strains within the coalition itself. As the meeting continued, Jasmine's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Stepping outside to answer, she heard the voice of Richard Whitfield himself. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone artificially pleasant. "I think it's time we discussed a resolution to this unfortunate situation." He paused before continuing. "I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement. Full forgiveness of any past due rent, 6 months free, in a re-upgraded apartment at any of our properties, and a cash payment of $25,000 for your inconvenience." The implied condition hung unspoken between them. "And what about everyone else?" Jasmine asked. "The other residents who've been discriminated against." The systematic overcharging based on race. Whitfield's voice hardened. "That's not on the table. This offer is for you alone, and it's contingent on your immediate disassociation from these protesters and a public statement clarifying that your initial complaints were based on misunderstandings rather than discrimination." Jasmine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "You want me to betray everyone who stood by me, to deny what we all know is true. I'm offering you a way out," Whitfield replied. "A chance to provide for your daughter without years of legal battles that you might lose. Think about Zora's future." The mention of her daughter's name from his lips felt like a violation. "Don't ever speak about my child again," Jasmine said, her voice low but firm. "And don't contact me directly. Any further communication should go through my attorneys." She ended the call, her hands trembling with both anger and fear. When she returned to the meeting and shared Whitfield's offer, Marcus wasn't surprised. It's another classic tactic. Try to pick off the leadership with individual settlements while maintaining the broader system. They'll approach others too. His prediction proved accurate. Throughout the afternoon, several key figures reported receiving similar calls, each tailored to their specific vulnerabilities. Some offers included job opportunities. Others focused on legal protections or financial incentives. None addressed the systemic issues at the heart of the movement. As evening approached, the situation deteriorated further. Reports came in of unidentified men photographing bikers' license plates and following volunteers to their homes. The local news broadcast selectively edited interviews to portray the protesters as aggressive and unreasonable. Online harassment intensified, with personal information of key organizers being posted publicly alongside threatening messages. The most disturbing development came after dark when several residents reported seeing men in unmarked vehicles conducting surveillance of the complex. "They're trying to intimidate us," Marcus observed, as they watched a black SUV with tinted windows cruise slowly past the entrance for the third time. Classic counter-movement tactics. Jasmine thought of Zora, now sleeping peacefully in a friend's apartment, considered safer than their own. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. She had started this by simply opening her door to people in need. Now hundreds were involved, many risking their jobs, reputations, and possibly safety to stand with her. "Maybe Whitfield's right," she whispered, not meaning to speak aloud. "Maybe I should take the settlement for Zora's sake." Tiana, overhearing, took Jasmine's hands in hers. "That's exactly what they want you to think, that you're alone, that you should look out for yourself and forget everyone else. But look around you. All these people are here because they believe in something bigger than individual comfort." Marcus nodded in agreement. Every significant movement for justice faces this moment, the point where the opposition marshals its full power to break the will of those seeking change. This is when many movements falter, when people retreat to the safety of silence and accept individual accommodations rather than collective justice. Jasmine looked out at the camp, where despite the growing pressure, hundreds remained committed to the cause. The lights of the tents and temporary structures created a constellation of resistance against the darkness. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We hold the line," Marcus replied simply. "We protect each other. We remember why we started, and we prepare for whatever comes next." As if in answer to his words, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed cut through the night. Headlights swept across the gathering as a convoy of police cruisers and unmarked cars pulled up to the entrance. From the lead vehicle emerged the chief of police, flanked by officers in tactical gear. The confrontation they had been dreading had arrived. Pre-dawn light bathed the scene in ghostly blue, as residents and bikers formed a human chain around the perimeter of Ridgewood Heights. The night had passed in tense vigil following the arrival of police, who had delivered an ultimatum: the gathering must disperse by 6 a.m., or they would be forcibly removed. Legal representatives had negotiated through the darkness, securing a temporary reprieve but no permanent resolution. Now, as the deadline approached, over 300 people stood shoulder to shoulder, linking arms in silent determination. Behind the human chain, the camp continued operating with volunteer medics, preparing for potential injuries, communications teams, live streaming to thousands of viewers, and designated observers, documenting everything with cameras, notebooks. Marcus moved through the crowd, providing last-minute guidance. "Remember, no violence, no profanity, no escalation. If they use force, do not resist. Fall back in an orderly manner. Those designated as witnesses stay out of the direct line and keep recording." Jasmine found herself at the front line, positioned directly across from the main entrance where police vehicles had gathered. Beside her stood Tiana Sarah Johnson and several bikers who had been with her since the first night. Their presence gave her courage, though her heart pounded painfully in her chest. At precisely 6 a.m., police loudspeakers crackled to life. "This is the Birmingham Police Department. You are participating in an unlawful assembly. You must disperse immediately. Those who fail to comply will be subject to arrest." The human chain held firm, people tightening their grip on one another. No one moved. The police advanced in formation, officers in riot gear, with shields and batons leading the way. Behind them came officers with zip ties for mass arrests. They stopped 10 feet from the human chain, creating a tense standoff. From the police lines, an officer with a captain's insignia stepped forward. "We have a judicial order to clear these premises of unauthorized occupants. Residents may return to their apartments. All others must leave immediately." Marcus moved to the front, legal documents in hand. "We have filed emergency motions contesting that order. The court has not yet ruled on whether essential services can be denied based on racial considerations during a state emergency." The captain's expression remained impassive. "That's for the courts to decide. My orders are to clear the property." As the tension escalated, national media crews pushed forward, cameras capturing every moment of the confrontation. The standoff had drawn journalists from across the country, transforming a local dispute into a nationally televised clash over housing rights, racial justice, and community power. The police line inched forward. The human chain held its position. The moment stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice cut through the tension. "Hold your positions, Captain. Let's not make a situation worse than it already is." The crowd parted to reveal a tall black woman in a tailored suit, flanked by aides carrying legal portfolios. Whispers rippled through both sides. "That's the State Attorney General." The police captain turned, clearly surprised by her presence. "Madam Attorney General, we have orders to clear this property, and I have concerns about potential civil rights violations," she replied calmly. "My office has been monitoring this situation, and we've seen enough evidence of discriminatory practices to warrant intervention." She held up a document. "This is an emergency injunction from the federal court prohibiting any forced removal of these individuals pending a full hearing on the housing discrimination claims." The captain examined the document, his expression unreadable. After a tense moment, he stepped back and conferred with other officers. Meanwhile, the Attorney General approached Jasmine and Marcus. "I can't solve everything today," she said quietly, "but I can ensure you get your day in court without anyone being arrested for standing up to discrimination." Marcus nodded gratefully. "That's all we're asking for, a fair hearing." The Attorney General turned to address the gathered media. "My office is launching a full investigation into the allegations of systematic housing discrimination by Whitfield Investment Group. Additionally, we will be reviewing the police response to these protests and the selective enforcement of ordinances based on racial considerations." Her clear voice carried across the suddenly silent gathering. "The right to fair housing is fundamental. The right to protest injustice is enshrined in our Constitution. My office will ensure that both are protected." The announcement electrified the crowd. Cheers erupted as the police began to withdraw, the captain clearly unwilling to challenge the state's highest legal authority on camera. As the immediate threat of forced removal receded, a new energy surged through the gathering. The Attorney General's intervention had accomplished more than preventing arrests. It had legitimized their grievances and elevated them to the state level. Her next actions demonstrated that this wasn't merely symbolic support. She established a command center in one of the vacant apartments where her staff began systematically interviewing residents about their experiences. Teams of investigators fanned out through the complex, documenting maintenance issues, examining lease agreements, and compiling evidence of disparate treatment. By mid-morning, what had begun as a confrontation had transformed into a government-sanctioned investigation. The media narrative shifted dramatically, with coverage now focusing on the apparent validity of the discrimination claims rather than the protest tactics. Mr. Whitfield, who had remained conspicuously absent during the police action, suddenly found himself the subject of multiple investigations. Not only was the Attorney General examining his housing practices, but state regulators were reviewing his business licenses, tax compliance, and corporate structure. The scrutiny extended to his political connections, with several city officials distancing themselves from previous statements supporting the property owner. "The tide is turning," Marcus observed as they watched investigators photographing the selective maintenance issues throughout the building. "But we can't let up now. This is when movements either consolidate their gains or lose momentum." Indeed, forces were still aligned against them. The counter-protesters remained, though they had moved further from the property under the watchful eye of state officials. Online disinformation continued, with coordinated attempts to discredit the Attorney General as politically motivated. Most concerning were reports that Whitfield Investment Group was liquidating assets and transferring properties to shell companies, potentially shielding them from legal judgments. The afternoon brought a new development when Jasmine received a call from the Attorney General's office requesting a private meeting. She found the state's top lawyer seated at a small table in the makeshift command center, reviewing documents with a furrowed brow. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I wanted to speak with you directly about what happens next." She laid out the situation with frank honesty. "We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Whitfield for housing discrimination, fraud, and several regulatory violations. However, these cases take time, often years. Meanwhile, residents need immediate solutions." The Attorney General slid a document across the table. "This is a proposed consent decree. Essentially, Whitfield Investment Group would admit no wrongdoing but would agree to significant changes in their practices, including standardized rent structures, transparent maintenance procedures, and third-party oversight. Additionally, they would establish a $5 million fund to compensate affected tenants." Jasmine studied the document. "What's the catch? The civil case would be resolved without a trial, meaning no public testimony and no precedent-setting judgment. Mr. Whitfield avoids criminal charges, and most importantly, from his perspective, keeps ownership of his properties." The Attorney General leaned forward. "I understand the desire to see him fully held accountable, but I also understand the practical needs of the residents who can't wait years for justice through the courts." It was a difficult decision, balancing the desire for complete justice against the immediate needs of the community. Jasmine requested time to discuss the proposal with the coalition leadership. The ensuing debate was passionate with valid arguments on both sides. Some felt accepting the consent decree would be surrendering just as they were gaining ground. Others believed it represented a significant victory that could provide immediate relief while they continued building a broader movement. As they deliberated, a new voice joined the conversation. Sarah Johnson, who had emerged as a leader among the white residents supporting the movement, shared an unexpected development. "We've been forming a tenant association," she explained. "Not just for this building, but across all of Whitfield's properties. We've already got commitments from over 70% of residents." She unfolded a blueprint on the table. "We've also been talking with a community development corporation about the possibility of converting the complex to resident-owned cooperative housing. If Whitfield is motivated to sell rather than face years of litigation and oversight, this could be our chance to transform the ownership structure entirely." The proposal energized the coalition, opening a new path forward that went beyond addressing past discrimination to creating a new model of community-controlled housing. When they presented this counterproposal to the Attorney General, she was intrigued. "It's ambitious," she acknowledged, "but if you can secure financing and demonstrate resident support, my office could help facilitate the transition as part of the settlement." By evening, a framework had emerged combining elements of the consent decree with a pathway to cooperative ownership. The Attorney General agreed to present it to Whitfield's legal team, using the leverage of potential criminal charges to encourage acceptance. As the news spread throughout the camp, the mood shifted from defiance to cautious hope. They weren't just resisting discrimination, they were building something new. That night, as residents and supporters gathered for a community meeting to discuss the proposal, Jasmine found herself called to speak. Looking out at the hundreds of faces turned toward her, she saw the full spectrum of her community represented: black and white, young and old, longtime residents and new allies, all united in purpose. 3 days ago, she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I was just trying to keep my daughter warm during a storm. I opened my door to strangers because it was the right thing to do." She gestured to the transformed community around them. "Look what happened because of that one simple act. We exposed decades of discrimination. We built alliances that crossed racial and social boundaries. We forced those in power to acknowledge our humanity." She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Whatever happens with the legal cases, we've already won the most important battle. We've proven that we are stronger together than we ever could be apart. We've shown that a community united can stand against even the most entrenched systems of power." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that echoed across the complex. In that moment, regardless of the practical outcome of their struggle, a profound truth had been acknowledged. The real transformation wasn't in policies or ownership structures, but in the bonds formed between people who had been taught to fear and mistrust one another. As the meeting concluded, and people dispersed into the night, Jasmine found Marcus standing alone, looking out across the community they had helped build. "What happens now?" she asked. He smiled, a gesture that conveyed both weariness and determination. "Now comes the hardest part," he replied, turning a moment into a movement. 6 months later, Jasmine stood at the podium in front of the newly renovated community center, once a vacant building adjacent to Ridgewood Heights, now the thriving heart of the neighborhood. Before her stretched a sea of faces, some familiar from those tense days during the storm. Others, new supporters drawn by what had become known nationally as the Birmingham Housing Justice Movement. Behind her sat dignitaries, including the state attorney general, civil rights leaders, and representatives from various motorcycle clubs from across the country. Most importantly, the front row held residents of what was now called Unity Heights Cooperative, the former Ridgewood Heights, transformed through community ownership. 1 year ago today, Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly through the speaker system. "I was a single mother, struggling to keep my apartment warm during an unexpected storm. Today I stand before you as the executive director of the Community Justice Center, an organization that has helped transform not just our neighborhood, but housing policies across the state." Applause rippled through the crowd as Jasmine recounted the journey from that first night when 18 stranded bikers sought shelter to the movement that had ultimately created a new model of community ownership and empowerment. The path had not been easy. The initial proposal to convert the complex to cooperative ownership had met fierce resistance from Whitfield Investment Group, requiring months of negotiation, legal maneuvering, and community organizing. The breakthrough came when several national housing justice organizations, impressed by the coalition's persistence, provided loan guarantees and technical assistance to make the cooperative conversion financially viable. Simultaneously, the Attorney General's investigation had uncovered evidence of fraud and tax evasion beyond the housing discrimination, creating additional leverage to force a settlement. Under the final agreement, residents had formed a non-profit cooperative that purchased the complex at a court-mandated fair market value. Whitfield Investment Group faced substantial fines, and Richard Whitfield himself ultimately pled guilty to reduced charges, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time. More significantly, the case had sparked similar organizing efforts at other properties, with 3 more successful conversions to resident ownership already completed and several more in process. "We didn't just win a building," Jasmine continued. "We created a model that can be replicated anywhere communities face discrimination and exploitation." She gestured to the transformed property behind her. The once neglected complex now sported fresh paint, repaired infrastructure, and well-maintained grounds. More importantly, it housed the same diverse community now empowered as cooperative owners rather than vulnerable tenants. The community center offered job training, legal assistance, childcare, and health services, addressing the broader needs that affected housing stability. Unity Heights doesn't just provide shelter, Jasmine explained. It builds economic security and community power. The cooperative's board of directors reflected the diversity of the resident population, with Sarah Johnson serving alongside Jasmine and others who had emerged as leaders during the crisis. Their collaborative governance had proven that integrated communities could thrive when everyone had an equal stake and voice. The transformation extended beyond physical space to individual lives. Zora, now 7, had recovered completely from her illness and was thriving in a new school environment where she led a junior community garden program. Marcus had established a housing justice legal clinic that trained law students to represent tenants facing discrimination, with several successful cases already completed. Tiana had founded a mobile health clinic that served uninsured residents throughout Birmingham, with support from various motorcycle clubs who provided both funding and volunteer staff. Other key figures from the original crisis had found new roles in the movement. Andre and Darnell had relocated to Birmingham to establish a training program teaching residents sustainable building maintenance. Lawrence had secured several city contracts for his construction company with a commitment to hiring from the community. Michelle had coordinated a network of biker clubs that provided transportation assistance for residents without vehicles. As Jasmine neared the conclusion of her speech, she addressed the deeper meaning of their movement. What happened here wasn't just about housing. It was about recognizing our common humanity and our collective power. When I opened my door that night, I wasn't just sheltering strangers from the cold. I was opening myself to the possibility that together we could create something none of us could achieve alone. She paused, looking out at the hundreds of motorcycles parked in neat rows along the street, their riders having returned for the anniversary gathering. The Defenders and other clubs showed us what brotherhood and solidarity truly mean. They didn't just bring resources and numbers. They brought a model of community that transcends the artificial barriers we've been taught to accept. The most unexpected outcome had been the transformation of some former opponents. Several residents who had initially joined the counter-protests had gradually become supporters and eventually participants in the cooperative. One of the security guards who had accompanied Mr. Whitfield during the confrontation now worked for the community center, having been moved by what he witnessed to reconsider his own role in perpetuating injustice. Most remarkably, a young police officer who had been part of the Dawn standoff had recently joined the center's outreach team, working to build better relationships between law enforcement and the community. As Jasmine introduced him to speak briefly about his journey, a powerful symbol of the potential for individual and institutional change, she caught sight of Zora in the front row, beaming with pride at her mother. The sight filled her with renewed determination to ensure that her daughter's generation would inherit a more just and compassionate world. After the formal program concluded, the celebration continued with music, food, and fellowship. Bikers mingled with residents, city officials conversed with community organizers, and children played in the spaces once defined by division and neglect. Jasmine found a quiet moment with Marcus watching the scene from the community center steps. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" she asked. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I've been fighting for justice long enough to know that change is possible, but this," he gestured to the vibrant gathering, "this exceeded even my hopes." "It's not finished," Jasmine noted. "We still have so much work to do." "The work is never finished," Marcus agreed. "But today we celebrate how far we've come. Tomorrow we continue building." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed community, hundreds of bikers prepared for a ceremonial ride through the city, a rolling testament to the power of unexpected alliances. Before they departed, they gathered in formation before the community center, engines silent, as Zora stepped forward with a ribbon to officially dedicate the building. The little girl, once sick and vulnerable during a winter storm, now stood confident and strong as she addressed the crowd. "My mommy taught me that when someone needs help, you open your door," she said in a clear voice that carried across the hushed gathering. "This community center is our door, and it's always open." With those simple words, she cut the ribbon, releasing hundreds of butterflies that had been gathered for the occasion. They rose into the evening sky, their wings catching the last golden light of day as they dispersed in all directions, carrying the promise of transformation beyond the boundaries of a single community. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. What had begun with one woman opening her door had expanded outward, touching countless lives and challenging entrenched systems. As the bikers started their engines, the collective rumble forming a thunderous counterpoint to the cheers of the crowd, Jasmine felt both the weight and the privilege of the journey ahead. The story of Unity Heights wouldn't end with this celebration. It would continue in the daily work of building justice, in the ongoing struggle against discrimination, and in the countless doors yet to be opened. Has this story of community transformation against racial discrimination moved you? If you believe in the power of everyday people coming together to create positive change, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring, true stories. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that a single act of kindness can start a movement. Have you ever witnessed or been part of a community standing up against injustice? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage, compassion, and community. Remember, change begins when we open our doors to one another, even when it's difficult or scary. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to look away from those in need. Jasmine's story teaches us that transformative change often begins with a single act of courage. By opening her door, when others closed theirs, she ignited a movement that exposed decades of systemic discrimination. The journey from individual kindness to collective action demonstrates how shared humanity can overcome deeply entrenched barriers. This story reminds us that discrimination thrives in isolation. When communities remain divided, those in power can easily target vulnerable groups. But when people unite across racial and social boundaries, recognizing their common struggles, they create a force too powerful to ignore. We learn that justice requires both immediate compassion and long-term vision. The bikers provided crucial emergency support, but lasting change came through strategic organizing, legal advocacy, and reimagining community ownership. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative challenges the myth that prejudice is inevitable. We witnessed former opponents transform into allies when exposed to different perspectives and shared goals. Real change happens not just in policies and structures, but in hearts and minds. The butterfly metaphor reminds us that liberation spreads. What begins as a response to immediate injustice can evolve into a model for broader transformation. When we refuse to accept discrimination as normal, we create ripples that travel far beyond our initial actions. Has this story touched your heart? We'd love to know which moment resonated with you most deeply. Was it Jasmine's courage to open her door despite her own struggles? The biker's immediate response to discrimination? or perhaps the community's transformation into something stronger and more united? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in the power of standing together against injustice, please hit that like button. It helps others find this important message of hope and solidarity. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change in their communities. Each subscription fuels our mission to highlight voices that might otherwise go unheard. Know someone facing discrimination or struggling to make a difference. Share this video as a reminder that they're not alone and that single actions can spark powerful movements. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage, compassion, and community building. Remember, the door to positive change is always within reach. Sometimes we just need the courage to open it first.